For more than a century, one question about Adolf Hitler seemed permanently unanswerable. Not what he did, not why he did it, but where he came from. His father was born illegitimate, his grandfather was never identified, and the man who built an empire on the mythology of racial purity could never have passed his own test. Then, in 2010, a DNA study of his living relatives produced a result so contradictory it made headlines around the world. And in 2025, blood recovered from the very sofa where he died delivered an answer no one expected. But the answer wasn't what the headlines said. It was stranger. To understand what that blood revealed, you have to go back to a small village in rural Austria, sometime around 1836. A woman named Maria Shicklgruber, unmarried and working class, became pregnant. She gave birth to a boy named Alois in June 1837. No father was listed on the baptismal record. 5 years later, Maria married a man named Johann Georg Hitler, an itinerant miller who drifted between jobs. He became Alois's legal stepfather. But when Maria died in 1847, it was not Johann Georg who took the boy in. It was Johann Georg's younger brother, Johann Nepomuk Hitler, a wealthier farmer living in the nearby village of Spittal. Nepomuk raised Alois through adolescence. He later willed him a substantial inheritance. And nearly 30 years after Maria's death, Nepomuk did something peculiar. He gathered 3 witnesses, appeared before a notary, and swore under oath that his brother Johann Georg, who had been dead for almost 2 decades, had always acknowledged Alois as his biological son. The parish priest in Dollersheim altered the birth register. The name Shicklgruber was crossed out. In its place, a variant spelling was entered: Hitler. The question that no one could answer then, and that no one could definitively answer for the next 140 years, was this: who actually fathered Alois? Was it Johann Georg, the wandering miller? Was it Johann Nepomuk, the man who raised him, paid for him, and went to unusual legal lengths to reshape his identity? Or was it someone else entirely? After the war, a third possibility surfaced. Hans Frank, Hitler's personal attorney, wrote a memoir while awaiting execution at Nuremberg. In it, he claimed that in 1930, Hitler had secretly ordered him to investigate rumors about the family. Frank alleged he found evidence that Maria Shicklgruber had worked in the household of a Jewish family named Frankenberger in Graz, and that the family's 19-year-old son had gotten her pregnant. According to Frank, Frankenberger had even paid child support. For decades, mainstream historians dismissed this. Their reasoning rested heavily on a single claim by a historian named Nicholas von Preradovic, who stated in 1957 that not a single Jew had been living in Graz before 1856. If there were no Jews in Graz when Alois was conceived in 1836, then the Frankenberger story collapsed. Preradovic repeated this claim in an unpublished letter in 1967, and again in a right-wing publication in 1989. No independent scholar ever verified it, but the assertion became embedded in the academic consensus like a fossil in sediment, taken for granted, rarely examined. And so the mystery remained open, but quiet. Most serious historians settled on either Johann Georg or Johann Nepomuk as the likely father. Hitler himself, in Mein Kampf, mentioned only a poor little cottager as his grandfather, a description that fit neither candidate. He never discussed his family background publicly. When his architect Albert Speer once told him that a sign had been erected in Spittal reading, "The Führer lived here in his youth," Hitler flew into a rage and ordered it removed immediately. Then came the DNA. 2010, a Belgian journalist named Jean-Paul Mulders teamed up with historian Mark Vermeeren. They tracked down 39 of Hitler's living patrilineal relatives across Europe and the United States, including a great-nephew named Alexander Stewart Houston, living in New York. They collected saliva samples and ran Y chromosome analysis. The Y chromosome passes almost unchanged from father to son, generation after generation. It is a direct genetic signature of the paternal line. The results were unexpected. The dominant haplogroup among Hitler's relatives was E1b1b. This particular genetic lineage is rare in Western Europe. It appears in roughly 9% of men in Germany and Austria. But it is far more common in North Africa, particularly among the Berber populations of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And it is found in 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi Jewish men. Headlines erupted. Hitler descended from Jews and Africans. The architect of the Holocaust carried the genetic signature of the people he tried to exterminate. But the story was more complicated than any headline could contain. Professor Michael Hammer of Family Tree DNA examined the same data and pointed out a critical nuance. Approximately 80% of men in Germany and Austria who carry the E1b1b haplogroup have no Jewish ancestry whatsoever. The haplogroup originated tens of thousands of years ago in East Africa and spread across multiple continents through ancient migrations. Carrying it says nothing specific about whether your recent ancestors were Jewish, Berber, Somali, or simply part of the deep European gene pool that absorbed these lineages millennia ago. Geneticist Razib Khan put it plainly: even within Europe, most men who carry this marker are not Ashkenazi Jews. And there was another problem. The 2010 study tested Hitler's relatives, not Hitler himself. No one had his direct DNA. The researchers assumed that the relative's Y chromosome was also Hitler's, but that assumption depended on an unbroken chain of paternity stretching back generations. If there had been a single break in that chain, if one ancestor's biological father was not the man listed on the record, the whole inference collapsed. In 2019, Leonard Sachs, writing in the Journal of European Studies, even noted that the methods by which the saliva samples were obtained would likely not meet the evidentiary standards of a reputable genetics journal. So what historians had in 2010 was a provocation dressed as a conclusion. An interesting signal from an indirect source, amplified by headlines that confused haplogroup distribution with ethnic identity. It told us something about the deep ancestral origins of the Hitler family line. It told us nothing definitive about whether Adolf Hitler had a Jewish grandfather. The field needed Hitler's own DNA. And for 80 years, that seemed impossible. In the spring of 2009, an archaeologist named Nick Bellantoni flew to Moscow. The Russian State Archive held 2 artifacts from the Berlin bunker. A skull fragment with a bullet hole, displayed since 2000 as proof of Hitler's death, and blood-stained fabric from the sofa where eyewitnesses said he shot himself on April 30th, 1945. Bellantoni was given 1 hour with the relics. He took tiny samples of both. The skull fragment struck him immediately. The bone was thin, the structure wrong. When his colleague Linda Straussbaugh at the University of Connecticut ran the DNA, the result was definitive. The skull belonged to a woman, likely between 20 and 40 years old, not a 56-year-old man. The skull was a dead end, but the blood on the sofa was not. That fabric swatch would sit in limbo for years. Then it reached the hands of Turi King, a geneticist at the University of Bath, famous for identifying the remains of King Richard III beneath a parking lot in Leicester. Beginning around 2021, King and her team spent more than 4 years extracting, verifying, and sequencing the DNA from the bunker blood. They compared it against a confirmed male line relative of Hitler's. The Y chromosome markers matched. This was the moment the century-old question began to crack open. The match meant 2 things simultaneously. First, the blood was genuinely Hitler's. Second, his paternal lineage ran exactly where the Hitler family tree said it should. If Hitler's grandfather had been an outsider to that male line, a Jewish man named Frankenberger, or anyone else unrelated to the Hitlers, the Y chromosome would not have matched his known relative. The chain was unbroken. The Frankenberger thesis, which had flickered in and out of academic debate for 75 years, was over. But the DNA had more to say. Working with colleagues at the Pasteur Institute, King's team found a deletion in a gene called PROK2. Variants in this gene are strongly associated with Kallmann syndrome, a rare genetic condition that disrupts the hormonal signals needed for puberty. In boys, it can mean low testosterone, undescended testicles, delayed or absent sexual development, and in roughly 5% of cases, a micropenis. King noted the finding aligned with a medical document from 1923, discovered only in 2015, that recorded right-sided cryptorchidism during Hitler's imprisonment after the failed Munich Putsch. Historian Alex Kay, a specialist in Nazi Germany at the University of Potsdam, called the Kallmann finding personally significant after 20 years of research. No one, he said, had ever adequately explained why Hitler was so visibly uncomfortable around women, why he almost certainly never had intimate relationships, why he devoted himself to politics with an absoluteness that excluded all private life. He married Eva Braun on April 29, 1945, one day before they both died. They had no children. The team also calculated polygenic risk scores, comparing Hitler's genetic markers against 30,000 individuals in a Danish database. Dita de Montes, a professor of psychiatric genetics at Aarhus University, found that his scores for schizophrenia, autism, and bipolar disorder fell in the top 1%. She stressed emphatically that this was not a diagnosis. Polygenic risk scores describe statistical tendencies in populations. They cannot tell you whether a specific individual had a specific condition. And that distinction matters, because when the documentary, titled Hitler's DNA, Blueprint of a Dictator, aired on Channel 4 in November 2025, the criticism was immediate and fierce. Adam Rutherford, a geneticist at University College London, called the program a deluge of misinformation and bad science. David Curtis of the UCL Genetics Institute warned that being in a high percentile for genetic risk often translates to a very low actual probability of developing a condition. Tom Booth, a bioarchaeologist at the Francis Crick Institute, questioned whether DNA analysis added anything meaningful to the understanding of a figure already documented more thoroughly than almost any person who ever lived. The deeper objection was ethical. By linking conditions like autism and schizophrenia to history's most reviled figure, critics argued, the documentary risked stigmatizing millions of living people who share those conditions but have nothing in common with Hitler's actions. Philip Oltermann in The Guardian pointed out the bitter irony. By suggesting genes shaped Hitler's psychology, the documentary edged close to the very worldview Hitler himself promoted. King, for her part, acknowledged the tension. She stated the research had been submitted to a high-profile scientific journal, but could offer no publication date. The production company, Blink Films, had chosen to release the documentary before peer review, a decision that cast a shadow over findings that might otherwise have reshaped historical understanding on their own terms. What remains after the headlines and the controversy is something quieter and more durable. The man who demanded Aryan purity from an entire continent could not have met his own standard. Not because of some distant ancestor from North Africa, as the 2010 study implied. Not because of a Jewish grandfather, as Hans Frank claimed, and as a century of rumor sustained, but because his own body was working against the mythology he built. A deletion in a gene. A hormone system that never fully activated. A condition that, under his own eugenics policies, would have marked him for elimination. Turi King said it plainly. If Hitler had been able to look at his own genetic results without knowing whose they were, and had applied his own criteria, he almost certainly would have sent himself to the gas chambers. Today, that blood-stained fabric still exists. The research awaits peer review. The skull in Moscow still belongs to an unnamed woman. And somewhere in the tangled parish records of rural Austria, the name of the man who fathered Alois Shicklgruber is still missing. If Hitler's DNA tells us anything definitive, it may be this. The obsession with blood purity was always a lie. But whose lie was it, really? Was it an ideology he believed, or one he needed, precisely because he suspected what his own bloodline might contain? If you want more stories where DNA flips history on its head, hit subscribe, because the next one is even crazier than this.